Hello, everybody. Buenas noches, boa noite, hello and welcome. My name is Lili Vieira de Carvalho. I'm the Executive Director of the Vancouver Latin American Cultural Center, VLAC, and I'll be your host tonight. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Especially tonight on the eve of Canada's first National Truth and Reconciliation Day, I want to encourage all of you to read and understand the history of this land and the people who have taken care of it for thousands of years, and what it means for you to be here. If you are joining us from another part of the country or another part of the world, there is a fascinating resource that I'm sharing in the chat so you can learn about the land where you live. It's called Native Land. I looked the other day to see the peoples of Brazil, and it's amazing how I didn't know much about that before. VLAC is a nonprofit organization with the mandate of sharing a deeper understanding of Latin American arts and cultures. Our goal is to establish the first cultural center for Latin American arts in Canada, right here in Vancouver. If you still don't know much about our organization, please visit our website. I'll add the link to the chat as well. And when you registered for tonight, if you were not on our newsletter, now you are. Of course, you can unsubscribe at any moment, but otherwise you'll get news from us usually twice a month. And so it's a great way to keep up with what we have been doing. Tonight's format will be quite simple. Jairo will give a 50-minute presentation, and then at the end, we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. So as you listen to Jairo, if you have a great question that you want to share, you can share it in the chat. I will be paying attention, and I will make sure that he gets the question. When Jairo finishes with the presentation, you can feel free to unmute your microphones, raise your hand when you have a question, or keep using the chat. I will be moderating the conversation to give you all a chance to speak. This event is being recorded for our archives and will be shared on VLAC's YouTube channel. So feel free to keep your camera off if you wish. I also want to acknowledge the support of Canadian Heritage, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and Metro Vancouver to all our 2021 programming season. I'm excited about today's topic, Exiles, Latin American artists in the diaspora. The reasons for Latin American artists fleeing their birth homes are many: personal, political, ideological, and sometimes also artistic. It is due to these movements that many artists broaden their artistic horizons while also embracing the Latin American experience in a completely different dimension. So I'm happy to introduce Jairo Salazar, who has an MA in art history from the University of North Texas. His background includes teaching modern, contemporary, and Latin American art history courses in Colombia, the United States, and currently here in Canada. His academic research is devoted to the dialogues between war, catastrophe, and trauma in contemporary art. He now works as an art history instructor at the Coquitlam College and collaborates as a guest lecturer for Mobil Art School in Vancouver. Jairo has been presenting this series of art talks with VLAC for many months now, and you can expect to see more of Jairo in the future. Hi, Jairo, welcome, over to you.
Thank you, Lili. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. It's great. It's great to see a lot of you, some usual attendees to the events and to the art talk series. And I'm going to start sharing screen. Can you see my screen now? Perfect. As Lili was introducing the topic for tonight, it came to my attention that actually I'm going to do something in reversal. So I'm going to start by asking a couple questions to get started. So the title that I proposed for the talk is Exiles, Latin American Artists in the Diaspora. And it gave me such a hard time to name the talk as Latin American Artists, because I have a lot of questions about whether these artists can be considered Latin American, or if we should specify the type of Latin Americanism that corresponds to the work of these artists. So I guess, we are going to talk about Exiles and we're going to talk about Diaspora. So the first question that I wanted to propose here tonight is, what do you consider, or what does it mean to be an exile? If anybody wants to raise their hand or use the chat, that would be great. Yeah, Michelle.
Thank you. Hi. That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about it before, but I think it means, to me at least, having to leave your country for reasons that you didn't choose.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much not necessarily a life or death situation, but a situation where your country's no longer welcoming to you.
Having to flee your homeland because of reasons that go beyond your control. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Let's see, we have something on the chat. Lily says, usually for political reasons more than anything else. Things that go beyond your control, but those reasons usually have to do with political upheavals. Perfect. I don't know if anybody else has any comment, or we are good with that definition. I think we can pretty much agree upon that definition. Now, what about diaspora? Like, sometimes we hear, especially those of us who are here in Canada, that we live in, the Colombian diaspora, the Brazilian diaspora, the Mexican diaspora, the Cuban diaspora. So how would you define the diaspora? Anybody? Oh, great. Anna says, the dispersion of any people from their original home country. That's an interesting definition, because it suggests that there is a relation between diaspora and forced displacement. Lily says, usually it is related to a group of people. Interesting. The dispersion of any people from their original home country. But that dispersion, I believe what Anna is trying to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that dispersion doesn't necessarily have to be forced. It's just simply, a community from a particular country decides to flee and start a new life because of some type of reasons, because of a disagreement with the current government. They decide to move and start a life somewhere else. Michelle says, I learned the word diaspora this year. I think of it as people who live out of their home country. Very interesting. Which means that our identity is not necessarily tied to the place where we are living. In other words, in order to be Colombian, or in order to be Canadian, or in order to be Brazilian, we don't necessarily have to be living in Brazil or in Colombia or in Canada. If I was born in Colombia, and if I have embraced my Colombian identity in any way, in any possible way, it means that even by living in Canada or in the US, I was still carrying my Colombianism around anywhere I was. Excellent. I just wanted to have that introduction for you to think. Lois says it also refers to a group of people, ethnic or national, who are dispersed throughout a number of places. I love that both Lois and Anna are coinciding in the use of the term dispersion, diaspora dispersion. Perfect. Tonight, I am going to focus on the work of 3 artists. Lily said that probably I will take 50 minutes. I hope so, because these artists they stir a lot of controversy even today, and they give us the chance to engage in a very powerful conversation about being an exile, also about being a Latin American artist and what that means, and also about being a Latin American artist in the diaspora. So I'm going to talk about Joaquin Torres Garcia, Uruguayan artist, Wifredo Lam, Cuban artist. I wish Dana was present, and probably she will recap this later. And I will finish talking about Roberto Matta, Chilean-born artist. And listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying Chilean-born and not Chilean artist, which are 2 very different things. And you will figure out why later tonight. So let's start with Joaquin Torres Garcia. He was born in 1874 in Montevideo, Uruguay, son of a Catalan father and a Uruguayan mother. He moves, or his family moves to Spain in 1891 when he was very young. And by then, Torres Garcia was only 17. Around 1918, he develops a solid interest for the design of toys. I'm going to talk about that further on. But basically here, as you keep reading, what I want to say, and I want you to keep in mind, is that Torres Garcia works for 4 decades. That's 40 years between France and Spain. He's finally back to Montevideo at his very mature years, when he's about 60 or 70 in 1934. So his entire career took place in Europe. So that creates an epistemological problem. Is he a Latin American artist, even though he lived 40 years in Europe? So that's one of the first questions that I want you to think of. But you don't need to answer that, but it's just for us to consider. Torres Garcia was well known as an abstract painter, but his earliest paintings reveal defined interest in the artworks of post-impressionist artists such as Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, but particularly, and this is an important information for you, of symbolist artists such as Pierre Puvis de Chavannes. If you compare the painting on the right with what Puvis de Chavannes was doing on the left, you notice that there is a similarity, there is a correspondence between what is doing one and the other. I don't know what I did here. Hold on. Oh, I apologize for that. It's okay. What was symbolism about? Symbolism was a movement that advocated for a subjective representation of nature based not on mimicry, that is material resemblance, and an accurate mimetic resemblance or mirroring of reality, but instead symbolism was based on a unique and creative interpretation of nature, reclaiming elements ignored by previous movements such as Impressionism, and rescuing elements such as imagination, the spiritual, and the universal truths. Keep in mind that by late 19th century, many artists had abandoned the Impressionist spirit for accuracy and representation of nature based on truthfulness and objective knowledge. So the symbolists were mainly focused on a more visceral, remorseless exploration of the inner self, the interior images and realities that are subjective, different in everyone, and that feel and embrace the world differently. Now, something happens while Joaquin Torres is in Europe. Joaquin Torres gets in contact with the works of avant-garde artists from the late 19th and early 20th century, such as Paul Cézanne, but particularly Pablo Picasso and Piet Mondrian. He meets Picasso while in Paris, and he meets Mondrian almost at the same time, around the same period. And he realizes that his interest in symbolism can now be translated into a more abstract way of figuration. Abstraction goes away or steps back from illusionistic representation. And what he learns from that heritage that comes from Picasso, from Mondrian, but that dates back to Cézanne, is that there is a different way to translate the problems of three-dimensionality in a two-dimensional space, in the sense that height in Cubism, in Cubist language, is synthesized in a vertical shape, width in a horizontal shape, and we are missing one that we don't see here, or we actually see it here, and we see it here. The illusion of profundity or spatial depth is reduced or is replaced by a diagonal. Torres Garcia insists on surface and flatness over volumetry and spatial depth, but he also learns, along with Mondrian and along with Picasso, that there is a different way to index, to capture the world without depending on resemblance, without depending on human presences and narratives, amongst other things. Now, look at this picture and look at what is happening here. Here we see a picture that takes place in Paris in 1930. Turns out that Torres Garcia was not simply a Latino visiting Europe and meeting friends to kneel at them, such as Picasso or Braque or Mondrian or Kandinsky. Torres Garcia, and this is something that art history books barely mention, was extremely influential also for their work, to the degree that Torres Garcia, in this picture, was one of the founders of a small avant-garde movement that was known as Circle and Square. I don't know how to pronounce that in French, so I apologize. I'm not going to read that. So here we see the logo, the typographic composition for the movement. And in this picture, we see Torres Garcia right next to, guess who this guy is? Piet Mondrian. And some other artists, I'm not sure, I would like to say that this is Picasso, but no, I don't think he's Picasso. This guy here is Vasily Kandinsky. So upon return to Paris, he joined in 1930, he created that group along with other additional group that he also organized known as International Constructivism. And within that context is how he met Theo van Desburg around the 1920s. This is even before the creation of Circle and Square. He met Theo van Desburg, he met Piet Mondrian, he met Vasily Kandinsky, and all of these artists had in common, they all shared the interest for abstraction. Now, Torres Garcia was struggling between figuration and abstraction, and he was also trying to find ways to insert the practice of painting in the realm of modern society, in the realm of practical things. That's how he arrived to this method of simplifying and organizing planes in series. And that sort of interest came from his devotion to toy making. He loved to make toys. He could not commercialize them. But the idea of creating toys, this kind of a connection with his childhood, goes back to a basic principle that understands the creative process not as the following of some principles and preconceived formulas tied to academic thought, but instead retrieves or recovers the creative process as a game, as a fundamental step whereby we explore and understand our relation as subjects within the world. When we play, what do we have? We have freedom, we have spontaneity, imagination, but we are also capable of inserting ourselves on the creative act and also into the order of modern society, the order of the functional, the order of things that enable us to integrate into the dynamics of modernity. So Torres Garcia synthesizes reality and abstraction. I do not feel comfortable dealing only with abstraction, used to say Torres Garcia. So he believed and he embraced his art as a play. As I mentioned before, the creative process is similar to the mind of a child than to the constraining order of rationality. Now, in Europe, abstraction was a reaction against resemblance, against the tyranny of rationalism, against the tyranny of the Enlightenment and of the Illustration movement that took place in France since the 18th century. But in Latin America, we didn't have a period of illustration. We didn't have a medieval period. We didn't have an academy to go against. We were, in the 19th century, early 20th century, new states, new countries. We didn't have industrial progress. And I guess I have discussed this in the previous talks. We were sons and daughters of reason, but our practices, our ways of living were not really the result of reason. We were still in search of a national identity. So our everyday was filled of dreams and fantasies, of nostalgic thoughts about a remote past that we don't even know how it was. So what makes Torres Garcia modern? Modernity consists in identifying our present right now, in identifying a trace of the past in our current present, but always looking at tomorrow. So we live at this particular moment, but we have an awareness of who we are. The problem of us as Latin Americans is that we still are trying to figure out who we are. And we define ourselves by what we are not. So Torres Garcia transcends the sense of modernity proposed by Mexican muralists into different senses. First, he did not live in Uruguay. Some people say that he was an exile and that his family fled Uruguay because of political reasons. That is still debatable. And the second reason why he overcomes the sense of modernity proposed by the Mexican muralists is that his work, when looking at it, does not indicate an explicit, obvious face that speaks of a local Latin Americanism, if you want to call it that way. Torres Garcia was a nomad. His work was about some kind of artistic nomadism. His forms relate to universal shapes that could be found in any type of ancestral culture, not only in Uruguay, not only in South America, but in any other region in the world that relates or speaks of an original sense of humanity. The process, the creative process of Torres Garcia consisted on two concepts that you see here on the screen: simplification and compartmenting. Now, simplifying means formal synthesis of visual elements, kind of like pictograms or hieroglyphs, whose visual strength relies on a universal meaning, on an understanding that affects, that touches us in a similar way. What do you see here? What is this? Pretty straightforward. What does it look like? Exactly. Michelle said fish. Lily said fish. This looks like a vase. This looks like a clock. This looks like a house. If we all are capable of understanding that right away without any code that decomposes, that defragments the meaning of those images, it means that there is something in our head, in our consciousness, that enable us to interpret that. Okay? Now, the other concept, compartmenting or compartmentalization. Compartmentalizing means organizing, isolating images in small boxes so their meaning remains unaltered, unaffected by an imposed narrative. Meaning, therefore, is extracted by association and not by imposition. So that's how he creates these artworks, by using these two principles of compartmentalizing, that's a hard word, and of simplifying, synthesizing and organizing in grids, so that the meaning, the presence of each image remains unique, but you can read some type of relations between one image and the other. The human, fish, survival, maybe, the sun, Inti, as Torres Garcia used to refer to it, Inti as the ancestral god, the base, and so on. Now, around 1939, Torres Garcia is back in Uruguay. And while in Montevideo, he creates this piece, monumental piece, titled Cosmic Monument. While in Montevideo, he organizes, he creates a couple movements, one that he refers as Universalismo Constructivo, Universal Constructivism, and the School of the South, La Escuela del Sur. It's a pretty iconic school, and it was very influential for movements that came out of Latin America after the 1950s, such as the MADI group and I forgot the Arte Concreto Invención and other movements that took place around that time. In this monument, there is a plaque with a description that I couldn't grab a photo from that description, but I could find the description, and it says the following. I will try to translate it as I read. The son Inti, the elder father of the continent, presides everything that lives on the surface of earth, in the air, in the water, and in the consciousness of men that are ruled by a law that represents them, and is also representing or presiding all these stones in this monument. Let it be our rule as well, and let Inti join all of us, or get all of us together, to live together in harmony. End of quote. So Torres Garcia is creating a synthesis, sort of a syncretism between abstraction, as he explored it in Europe, and paganism, ancient gods, deities, divinities, coming from pre-Hispanic systems of religion. So when he creates La Escuela del Sur, he states, I open quote, and this is a very famous drawing that states the inverted America, el norte es el sur, the south is the north. Faced then with problems of other countries, I open quote here, without being selfish, we should be even more interested in our own problems. Here we have been given ground to cultivate, and we should fulfill our duty. Therefore, even before this, we turn the map around, indicating that the north was the south, and so, in a way, cutting our ties to the spiritual tyranny of Europe. Let us reintegrate ourselves into the great Indo-American family. And I repeat, we will achieve this in the measure in which we are able to stop thinking about it. That's a huge pun at the Mexican muralistas. Because in thinking about it, continues Torres Garcia, something extremely dangerous can happen, falling into the archaeological, making South America's pastiche. And that has at all costs to be avoided. That is what everyone who has tried to make an indigenous art has fallen into. Chileans, Mexicans, Peruvians, etc., not excluding figures like Diego Rivera. Ouch. And if not that, into another stumbling block, just as dangerous, the folkloric. End of quote. Should we consider him as a Latin American artist under the same demands and expectations as what we have discussed thus far in our art talks, with the type of expectations that we were having with the Mexican muralists and with the social realists and the indigenists? So another problem that Torres Garcia faced, and one of the reasons why when we talk about Latin American art, Torres Garcia is not like a name that stands up, particularly on these sides of the world. We always think about Rivera and about Frida Kahlo and about all these guys, is that his intention was to create a unique way of communicating for Latin Americans, a unique Latin American art, which is the same mistake, the same rabbit hole from which the muralist fell. So if you create abstraction, if you create a system for abstraction, that's great because you are opening meaning, but you are also closing meaning for other purposes, for other intentions. I'm trying to delete here my markings and I don't know what is going on. It's not working for some reason that I don't understand. But anyway, it doesn't matter. On top of that, abstraction in Latin America wasn't really well received. It has never been, in a way. Michelle asked, why did he have the sudden interest in his home country? Good question. Good question. I guess, and this is something that we're going to discuss with Wifredo Lam, it's something that I have faced on a personal level. Somehow, and I think we have discussed this before, when you are far away from your home country, you become more aware of things that you had not thought about or that you had not realized as you were living in your homeland. I think when talking about Wifredo Lam, we can find an answer, a possible answer. This is just a hypothesis to what Michelle is asking. Well, let's take a look now at Wifredo Lam. So Wifredo Lam, sorry, I just lost my, give me just one, I don't know what I did here. Can you still see my screen? No, give me just one sec. Just had a small issue here. There we go, we are back. Sorry about that. Wifredo Lam, a Cuban artist, was born in Havana in 1902. And Wifredo Lam is such a great example of somebody whose identity is really hard to define. He was born in Cuba, but his father was a Chinese merchant. His mother was a mulatto woman with some American Indian roots. And his childhood was strongly influenced by not only this element, but also by his grandmother. Turns out that his grandmother was a santera. A santera from Santeria is a candombe priestess. Candombe is some kind of rhythm, but also a religion in Santeria dating back to Africa. And his grandmother, Wifredo Lam's grandmother, felt a little disappointed, a bit down, when she learned that his grandson did not want to become a babalao. What is a babalao? A babalao, I'm going to write the term here, is the highest level, a high priest in the candombe rituals. Lam explains this situation, and I open quote here. He says, I went to Europe to escape from my father, the symbol of the father. So he's not talking here, parenthesis, he's not talking here only about his father, his fatherly figure. He's also talking about the system, la patria, the country, the land, the politics. I thought, continues Lam, this journey will resolve everything. But Europe, I encountered other problems as oppressive as those I left behind. My return to Cuba meant, above all, a great stimulation of my imagination, as well as the exteriorization of my world. I responded always to the presence of factors that emanated from our history and our geography, tropical flowers and Black culture. End of quote. Lam achieved political and artistic awareness while overseas, maybe because of the influence and partnerships with intellectuals and artists such as André Breton, Pablo Picasso, and Salvador Dali, amongst others. During his stance in Spain, as we see in this picture, in this painting, we notice some considerable influences from modern academic masters, such as Picasso, Matisse, and Hieronymus Bosch. But upon return to Havana in 1943, his impressions are of dismay, disappointment, and melancholia. If you want to know my first impression, says Lam in an interview, when I returned to Havana, it was one of terrible sadness. Something happened between here and here. And you can probably find the answer to what happened here with his experiences in Europe, because when we take the names of Salvador Dali, of André Breton, and even Pablo Picasso, they were all associated to the European movement of surrealism. So you might be thinking, oh, well, Wifredo Lam was just copying the surrealists. Keep in mind, my friends, that surrealists were very aware of what was happening in other cultures, in other countries, in other societies. And they were obsessed with what they termed under the coin, the exotic. That's the cultural other, that which I am not. And part of that exoticism was present and prevailing in places like Mexico. André Breton, the founder of surrealism, visited Mexico before he founded the surrealist movement in Europe. So in a way, we could say that the avant-garde movements in Europe were a result of many things to which they were exposed and appropriated in a sort of a post-colonial attitude from, or neo-colonial attitude, that is, from their non-Western counterparts. So what we start looking here is a good example of syncretism. And for those who are not familiar with the term, syncretism can be defined as an amalgamation, a mixture, a blend of different cultures, traditions, and religions into one unified system. In the context of religion, a unified system of faith, so syncretist religions. In the context of art, a simplified or a unified system of pictorial representation. In a letter written in 1943, Lam describes the following, I open quote again. Havana at that time was a land of pleasure, of sugary music, mambas, rumbas, and so forth. He's talking about when he returned to Havana and how disappointed he was. And he continues, Blacks were considered picturesque. They themselves initiated and imitated the whites and regretted that they did not have light skins. And they, the Blacks, were divided. The Blacks disdained the mulattoes, and the mulattoes detested their own skin because they were no longer like their fathers, but they were not white either. End of quote. So Wifredo Lam, to answer a little bit, to answer Michelle's question, is reclaiming, is asserting his own roots, but in a critical way. He's making a criticism. He's questioning his own lack of unified identity by creating a deformity of figures. So the deformity of the space, the deformity of the pictorial plane, the deformity of colors, the deformity of the figure as this sort of biomorphic, amorphous shape also speaks as the deformity of his own self. He is a son of many things that are converging into one single entity. So this amalgamation also evokes a synthesis of pagan and Christian symbols. And his modernity is achieved via refusing indigenista and muralista trends that considered modernity as the simple, easy depiction of the here and now, of a present in a context, in a time, in a space with a defined face. What makes Lam modern, in a similar fashion as Torres Garcia, is that their art has no time. Their art is relevant and present at any moment that we want to take a look at. So the jungle or Omi Obini could have taken place yesterday, 1,000 years ago, today, or it might be a vision into the future, 1,000 years from now. Why am I bringing this? The key to understand this is that avant-garde Europeans found in remote cultures, different from their own, a sense of freedom and creativity they did not own. Europe was in an identity crisis by the early 20th century and all the way into the mid-20th century. Non-Western cultures were remote to them, were an oasis. But people like Torres Garcia or Lam, whilst in Europe, realized that this encounter with the exotic made no sense for them. That encounter with the exotic was not an encounter with a foreign land, but instead it was an encounter or a reunion with themselves, with their own roots. They did not have to look out for inspiration. They were simply looking out at themselves, at their own conflicting realities and identities, because Picasso was looking out. When Picasso created Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso incorporated the resemblances or the similar features of all the African, Oceanic, and Iberian masks that he avidly collected, parentheses, sacked from museums, because he was obsessed with cultures and with ways of understanding space and plasticity different from his own. But Lam didn't have to look out. Lam created this synthesis of things. The European, in the meantime, the European approach to the exotic, to the primitive, was quite conflicting, condescending, demeaning in a way, abusive, if you will. But in our case, sorry, before I say in our case, in Europe, the approach seems to take place, or to take rather, non-Western cultures and non-Western societies, non-Western art, in our case, Latin American art, as a kind of mysterious aboriginal expression that cannot and should not reveal any sort of influence from what was coined in Europe as avant-gardism. So Latin American art for Europeans was great as long as it was exotic, as long as it was indigenista, as long as it was speaking of, you know, peasants and poverty and social struggles and all that. The irony of this consists in the lack of coherence and clear contradiction present by that attitude. The avant-garde, just to go back to Le Demoiselle d'Avignon, was nurtured by an interest in the primitive, by an interest in the aboriginal, the universal, the originary, anything that could set apart from European classicism. That's interesting to see that irony. In no other instance in the jungle, in no other instance in this painting, The Jungle, is literally quoting the figure of Chango, a Yoruba deity patron of rains and thunders, paired with the Catholic Santa Barbara. Ochun, Yoruba deity of love, similar to the Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre, Cuba's patron, or any other, but instead it is indexing them in a more expansive parameter of their imaginative world. There is some sort of connection here between the Catholic figure of Santa Bárbara Bendita and Chango, the god or the goddess of rains and thunders. Even on the left, we see this vertical standing power figure from the Santeria Yoruba. And this carved column supported a courtyard roof that was placed in a king's palace among the community of the Yorubas, a people in West Central Africa. And to visually reinforce the power of the king was placed on top or sits on top of a small horse, holding a pistol and a spear at the top of this vertical pole or vertical stack. I guess the relation between Santa Bárbara Bendita and Chango is better pictured or is better defined in a famous song. I'm going to play just a short fragment of that song by Celina y Reutilio, I believe. So, and the title of the song, it's a pretty gospel, bluesy song in a way, is Que Viva Chango. So let me just play it for you. I just have it right here. I heard that you could listen to the song. That's basically a synthesis. Yeah, I was playing it. You couldn't hear it? Nobody could hear it? Let me play. Hold on. I just fixed it. It's just a fragment. It's just 10 seconds. Can you hear it? So in a sense, that's defining the syncretism in religion between Chango and Santa Barbara. The song, for those who couldn't understand, says, dearest Santa Barbara, light of my life, and then he's making a transition into Chango. So he's speaking about Santa Barbara, but then he's speaking about the pagan god, the Yoruba Santista god or Santeria god, Chango, and long live Chango, lovely Chango, lovely Chango. And that's goes on and goes on through the entire song. So we see these figures again, the synthesis also in terms of what we have in terms of living creatures. Hold on here. There you go. Right here. Woman, animal, and nature, all in the same creature. Humanoid figures, biomorphic figures, which are not entirely human. And yeah, that song is pretty famous in Colombia, says Angela. I love it, by the way. And every time I listen to it, it sticks in my head. So it gives me a hard time to forget it. But the synthesis between vegetation, nature, scissors, the moon, faces, and bodies that are acting pretty natural. I wouldn't say violent. I say that he's trying to be explicit in the sense of connecting this type of rituals with the presence of the human body. It's another way of looking at the human body, which I really, really appreciate. I really, really enjoy, and which in his later works sort of suggests some kind of connection with surrealist ideas, with dreamlike states, fantasies, nightmares, and that type of thing. Let's finish with Roberto Matta, and I will try to move as quickly as possible. The case of Roberto Matta is very interesting because I guess if Roberto Matta was with us, he will definitely say, I am not a Chilean artist. I was born in Chile, but I don't like Chile. As a matter of fact, I hate Chile. And I guess the fact that I was born in Chile is just, an act of chance. He was born in 1911 in Santiago, a Spanish father, French mother. He spent almost all his life in Europe and in America, in the US. In Europe, he met Federico Garcia Lorca and Rafael Alberti, two very influential figures for the creation of the Surrealist movement. Around 1936, he's introduced to Salvador Dali, and later on, he meets André Breton and other members of Surrealism. Because of the Second World War, Matta flees, not Chile, but Europe. And he moves, I believe he was living in Paris. I will have to double check that information. And he moved to New York. And around 1941, Matta visits Mexico in company of his friend Robert Motherwell, an abstract expressionist, which, by the way, started in the process of creating these meanings in the context of pictorial representation because of many of the lessons left by Matta whilst Matta was in New York. Meanings in the context of pictorial representation are attributions given either by general consent or by the artist himself. Since the meaning in Matta's paintings is so ambiguous, we are forced to forget any national attribution in his work. Matta's paintings are not Chilean. They don't speak of a reality in Chile. And if they do, it's because we are making that association, but it's not explicit. Matta's paintings are simply that. are paintings. So we could probably say, if we wanted to, that Matta is an artist that was born in a Latin American country, whose nationality makes him a Latin American artist, but his art is not Latin American. And we can debate about that. I would love to have a debate about it. Matta originally was an architect, but while in Europe, he met in Paris in 1932 Le Corbusier, the architect. After meeting Le Corbusier, Matta said, I'm not sure about this guy. I don't like what he's doing, and I don't want to continue being an architect. So after looking at the works of Picasso and particularly Salvador Dali, he realized an opportunity to explore his mind and transfer those dreamlike states into painting. Look at this painting by Matta from 1937. Around the same year, he moved to New York. And look at what Arshile Gorky, Mark Rothko, and Jackson Pollock, who were apprentices of Matta, did around the 1940s. So there is some scholarship, there is some literature around that suggests that one of the biggest ideas that made abstract expressionism possible in America came from the influences of two Latin American artists, Roberto Matta and David Alfaro Siqueiros. So instead of thinking about the history of art in the way that it has been taught to us, we should probably flip the coin and consider to what degree Latin American artists, or rather artists born in Latin America, also influenced the work of this artist simultaneously. I know, Lily, I know that we're over an hour, but I figured we have participated too. So is it okay if I just keep like 5 minutes or something? Sure, perfect. Okay, so in order to wrap up, around 1941, Matta visits Mexico in company of his friend Robert Motherwell. And here in Mexico, he expanded his understanding of ancestral cosmologies and cosmogonies. From that point on, after that experience in Mexico, his artworks reveal a strong interest to represent figures similar to machines or to goddesses or goddess that are brought out of fiction or out of ancestral ways of thinking. He had the ability to combine the problem of physical space with the cosmic, with the sidereal, and also interplaying, mixing science with the unconscious and with the mythical, with the irrational. We see some implicit violence in these biomorphisms that kind of resemble some of Lam's work, that set them apart from Torres Garcia, who was an abstract constructivist, if you want to call it that way. He was all about geometric shapes, exact shapes. In this case, these are more organic shapes. And we see here, it always, when I look at this painting, it always seemed to me like a math dictator, like a math professor. And I know this is only 1946. Pinochet was not still around. But this picture suggests a kind of imposed violence taking place in a closed room, like in a classroom in a way, like a math professor feeling like a dictator, just throwing everything at everybody in front of them. Here's yet one more biomorphic artwork. So it's pretty harsh in a way. It's pretty rude if you will, visually speaking, that is. And finally, just 3 points of convergence on these artists and what makes them unique as Latin American artists. First, they were superseding or overcoming their identity as a concept attached to an idea of a nation. Within their work, these artists are not searching for an identitarian image for themselves as Latin Americans, or are they trying to impose a style according to their home country? They are not trying to be autobiographical by any means. Their works are impersonal. They are filled with visual metaphors of a literary kind. Their work is atemporal. It presents an anachronism. So the influence and impact of their work for posterity can also be explained by looking at the way they do not stick to a sense of the contemporary or of the eternal presence. And finally, they are concerned, they are modern in the pictorial and plastic sense, and not in the thematic or historical sense. They are not interested in producing a nationalistic or to become the testimonial voice to tell stories or events related to the so-called problema latinoamericano. Their search, and hence their importance at a global scale, is directed towards the realm of modern art itself, and not to what art can tell or reveal about the identity of a subject, a culture, or a nation. I will just leave you with this short quote by one of my favorite songs, one of my favorite bands from 1971. I will read it in Spanish, and I will finish with that. Estamos ciegos de ver, cansados de tanto andar, estamos hartos de huir en la ciudad, nunca tendremos raíz, nunca tendremos hogar, y sin embargo, ya ves, somos de acá. Thank you.
Hi everybody. Wow, what a trip. It's really, really interesting stuff. Thank you for coming, Ilka. She's disconnecting now. We still have some time to talk. I just wanted to give anybody who wants to have a chance to say something or to.
We have a question from Alvaro.
Exactly. Go for it, Jairo.
So Alvaro says, oh yeah, I thought about talking about time and talking about going above the time limit. I thought about incorporating Rufino Tamayo, but it was too much. And it's certainly somebody that I would love to talk about later on, because there was a huge debate between Tamayo and the muralistas. They kind of like hated each other. And Alvaro says, Rufino Tamayo tried to negotiate his exile by developing what he called a universal morality. But his success in Europe and the United States had a lot to do with his Mexicanness. Does transcending native identity subvert value in an art world or market that insists on fetishizing, exoticizing, or glamorizing Latin American artists? I guess a way to answer that question could be to look at a couple factors. One thing is the subverted value from the artist and the insistence of the artist on not to be called a Latin Americanist, which is the case of, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Gabriel Orozco. A different thing is the insistence from the establishment in placing your work or reading your work within a sort of localism. I've had that conversation with a lot of artists, including artists that have participated at events here in the Black, Carlos Colli. for instance. And the problem is that as much as the artist tries to insist that what he's doing or she's doing has nothing to do with a Latin American reality, when outsiders look at what they do, they say, oh, I guess you are working with soil, with dirt, because that speaks of the dirty streets in Mexico City. And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with that. Stop tokenizing me. So fetishizing, exoticizing, glamorizing, tokenizing is a way of placing yourself as a Latino, as if you were only that. And I'm not, again, I'm very critical about it. I'm not suggesting there is anything wrong with that. What is wrong is to only encapsulate you as that. Instead, I guess my fight is, instead of talking about Latin American artists, why don't we talk about artists? You know, particularly today in a globalized world, it's really hard to think about the work of artists working here in Canada, for instance. It's really hard to think of their work as if it came from, or if it is evocative of the place where they were born. I don't think that's the case with many of the artists that we have here living in the diaspora. Thank you, Alvaro, for the question, by the way. Yes, a perceived market value, because it's also more profitable too. It's better to sell the work of Lily as a Brazilian artist than as an artist who is concerned with issues corresponding to diasporas, migration, identity, and whatnot. Just to give an example, you know, I have no idea if Lily is an artist or not. Just
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder. It's so specific from visual arts. I'm trying to. I know that's not your wheelhouse, but I wonder how that works in other arts. You know, like with music and literature, because there is that here in our Latin American diaspora in Canada, writers who stay, let's say Latin American writers who stay on the theme of what they know best, but it's different because it's a storytelling, and so then you write about what you know. With visual arts, you can have some of those artistic references and the imagery from Latin America, but you also have everything else. So I'm just trying to think if there is some kind of parallel. Yeah,
it's really interesting because I do feel that parallel. I think it exists, certainly, particularly with music, especially with musicians of say a Latino descendants who join a band, say here in Canada, and somehow they are expected to perform some type of traditional or some type of native music. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the rule. So I can definitely see that happening in music. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if anybody here is into literature, but I'm pretty sure that happens too in literature. You know, you are creating some kind of fiction, and somehow your fiction is mandatorily connected to your Colombian experience or to your Mexican experience, or So I'm pretty sure that takes place. Michelle says, in my personal experience, the foreign perception of Latin American anything seems to be rooted on stereotypes. For sure. I can see why artists want to distance themselves from the term Latin American artist. Some don't want to distance from that. I mean, I've met plenty of artists from Latin America here, and they love talking about, their roots. And that's absolutely perfect. I also think, going back to Alvaro's comment, if you are not uncomfortable with playing with the devil and negotiating and understanding that there is a market with that, then go for it. Like, we all need money, we all need to survive. And if people crave for that type of depictions, for that type of visualizations, then fine, perfect. I guess, you know, you are sort of like sneaking in the system like a Trojan horse in a way. Lois has a question. Is there more to say about the modern impulse to recreate or appropriate metaphysical cosmologies? Was this preoccupation carried in elitist Latin American arenas as much as in Europe, in art schools, etc.? That's a great question. I'm thinking, you know, there is now a big market for astrology, and suddenly a lot of people are into astrology, and I find that very interesting. In the same way as people who go on these trips to drink ayahuasca or yahe or that type of thing. Makes me wonder if there is a real concern about it, or if it's more kind of an opportunistic, trendy approach. I'm pretty sure that preoccupation has taken place in Latin America. However, and I speak for probably Angela can jump in here because she's a fellow Colombia. But now there is a current conversation in Colombia about indigenous rights as well, but doesn't get to the degree of conversation that we have had here. It doesn't even compare to the kind of, I was actually surprised to see that tomorrow there is an actual day devoted for remembering, for considering, for trying to understand what happened with First Nations and with children from First Nations communities and whatnot. In places like Colombia, we don't really have that conversation. I don't know if that answers Louis' question. I mean, it's a really hard question to answer, but I guess my way of answering it is by looking at how profitable it is nowadays to adhere to a cause. You name it, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, or Every Child Matters. I know there is a lot of awareness, and it's great that people are acknowledging that. But at the same time, I wonder if it is just simply to meet a quota, you know, just to say, oh, we support this and we support that, and there's that. But on your daily life, what do you do about it? You know, so Angela.
Oh, yeah, I just want to add something about what you just said about the indigenous way we see it in Colombia. I've always admired the way Canada somehow acknowledged the territory, and that simple thing about saying where we are like working from and doing that indigenous acknowledging, it has always been very surprising for me because as you said, it's not the way we kind of embrace indigenous culture here in Colombia. Like, it's not even close. And it has been very surprising how lately indigenous has been taking like their place. Like, there's just like a symbolic thing they have done recently that was taking those like Hispanic statues from the central parks and trying to let them down. I read in Mexico, they're doing the same thing. So they're taking those estates off just because they don't want to have the computers and the Spanish people like being in the middle of the parks, and instead they want like a little bit of respect and recognition that they haven't asked for in the past. So just want to add that.
I might sound a bit too critical about acknowledging it, but I actually think, and I had this conversation with a colleague from back in Colombia, there is such a significance in the act of acknowledging, even if it is just to meet a quota. And the reason is that we are doing this today, but in 10, 20, 30 years, the kids, the children that are being educated as we speak will have that already sort of internalized. So as we speak, they listen in their schools. We acknowledge that we are placed on unceded territory. Just that. It doesn't matter if it is to meet a quota. Just acknowledging that you are in unceded territories. My God, that's a huge step towards reconciliation. Something that unfortunately, I don't know about Brazil, I don't know about Mexico, but I can speak for Colombia. No way. I mean, you will never, it will blow my mind the day the president of Colombia states, I acknowledge that we are in unceded territories of the Muiscas, Chibchas, Taironas, Wayús, etc., 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 etc. It will be amazing, but that is not going to happen because we believe that it doesn't happen to us. Like we don't have that. We don't have racisms. We don't have discrimination. Michelle says, it all starts with opening the conversation. Exactly. Mexico is not doing very well in terms of reconciliation and acknowledging. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I don't know about the rest of Latin America, but at least in Mexico, we seem to glorify Europe and the United States. And I think that contributes greatly to like pushing the indigenous peoples that are still like alive and thriving in our country, while pushing them down, because we have this idealized perception of Europe. Is that the case in Colombia, for example?
Absolutely. We have Angela is going to laugh at this, but we have an internal joke in Colombia that says that in Colombia, the upper classes want to look like Europeans, the middle classes want to look like Americans, and the poor want to look like, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's how the joke goes, that the poor want to look like Mexicans. And the reason, I'm sorry, that's how the joke goes. I mean, I'm not making it up. I'm just saying that the idea of the joke is that the influences of foreign cultures into different sectors in the society pyramid, I guess, the way of creating identities doesn't come from localisms, but from foreign influences. So in the case of the popular classes was because the government sponsored free cinemas and free theaters with Mexican movies from Cantinflas and, you know, the series of Tintan and Capulina and Chespirito and all that sort of thing. So the popular classes will grow up with that type of idea that Mexico was the place to go in a dreamlike state. In the middle classes, it was the case with cable, with televised cable. And what will you get in cable? American television. And in the case of the higher classes, well, they were educated, particularly in the late 19th century, they were educated in Europe, in France, in Spain. So that there was always this wish to, I grew up with that idea that America was, wow, you know, like the US, the best, and I want to go to Disney and I want to work at Pixar, and America is the best, and I want to eat at McDonald's and whatnot. So definitely there is that sort of mystification of the white, of the level of whiteness that we are overexposed to.
Yeah, to just complete, Anna was saying that it's virtual signaling, and I wonder if she was talking about that, about the land acknowledgement, which I'm not sure if that's what she was referring to. But I would say that from the Latin American experience, virtual signaling is a step ahead. It's, it's like you start by virtual signaling, and then if you are doing that just to look good, at least you know that what look good seems like, and it's a step in the right direction. And I think now it's fair to criticize virtual signaling in Canada, because you can just do it just be just be on your speech, and you are not walking your talk. And so it's definitely fair here, but it's what Jairo is saying, like if the president of Colombia acknowledged the original peoples of Colombia, it would be a pretty good step forward. The same goes for Brazil, of course, especially right now. So I think that that's all the time we have. And thank you so much, Jairo. This was pretty exciting, and thank you everybody to making the time to be here with us tonight. The video recording of this event will be available on VLAC's YouTube channel, and you can see also previous talks by Jairo and other of our programs there, and I'm putting the link on the chat. You might also want to follow VLAC on our social media channels. So this one is Facebook. And that's Instagram, sorry. This one is Facebook. I also want to remind you that VLAC has 2 events coming up in October that might interest you. And I will be happy to know, which probably already does, that the reading group is back on October 12th. It's not on our website yet, but it will be in the next couple of days. Just so save the date for October 12th. If you guys don't know about the reading group, it's awesome. It's a short stories from Latin America reading group in partnership with the Latin American Studies Department at UBC. And so you can read the short stories in translation to English, and you can read them even on that same day. And the conversations are amazing, free to participate. And later this month, we have our most awaited event of the year, our signature event, which this year is going to be Alex Cuba streaming live from the Orpheum Theater. That's free for everybody in Canada and abroad. Just go to this link that I'm going to put on the chat, and there is instructions on how to join the live stream. Share with your friends. Today we heard that Alex Cuba was nominated for yet another Latin Grammy for his new album, and he's going to be singing songs of that album on stage. So we really hope that you guys can make time to see. That's going to be on October 21st. Thank you, Michelle, for putting that on the chat. I appreciate that. And good also to know that both the reading group and the live streaming of Alex Cuba are free events, as this event was a free event. And if you'd like to keep events like this available to all, please consider donating even a small amount to VLAC, and this is the link to donate. So that's it for tonight. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn off my camera. Yes.
Thank you. Just thank you, everybody, particularly Alvaro, who is in Utah. It's great to have these connections via Zoom. Luis, so great to have you here, and the rest of you, Luisa, Anna, Michelle, Lily, of course, Angela.
Angela is in Colombia. She's speaking from there today.
And Angela is in Colombia.
Yeah,
oh, wow. It's been a while.
It's an international crowd here. The beauty of Zoom.
And looking forward to maybe in the near future have one of these events in person.
We'll make it
It will
happen.
be great. And the level of connection that we have here in Zoom is so special that I don't want to imagine how it will be like in front in a physical space. The type of synergy that we could feel will be phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will leave the event on just for a little while longer, so you can get the links if you need, but we are signing off. And thank you everybody once more.